Good morning, friends. Good morning, good Tuesday, good chilly Tuesday morning for you. And not saying that it's a good day for chili, but it probably is, since it is chilly. It definitely is chilly out there today. But good morning, and welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. I'm PB, Pastor Brian, pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church. And great to be here and great to be with you this morning. Thank you for joining us. This is episode 13 on our journey through Matthew. We've done a bunch of books of the Bible so far, and we are currently working our way through Matthew. If you're just joining us for the first or second time, welcome. You can always catch up by watching the video recordings, which are available on Facebook and YouTube. Excuse me. Just got to scroll back through them to find them. We should probably do some work at putting them together in little playlists. That would probably be a good idea. Put all Matthew together. Anyway, we'll work on that at some point. But good morning and welcome to being here. I see some folks are joining us and some folks have already started chiming in. So good morning. Welcome, Marcia. Hello. And hello, Ron. Present. Good to have you with us this morning. Good morning, Cheryl. Great for everybody to be here today. Thank you for that. And excuse me, some others might be joining us, and some others probably join later. Watch the video recording. Again, that's one of the blessings of doing this stuff in this fashion, this distance learning, so to speak, or distant groupings. You're able to watch it whenever you can. And I appreciate the fact that you are doing that. So thank you for that. And let me know. So even if you're watching the recording some other time today or tomorrow or next week, you can say something, say hello, or leave comments and questions. So I check all that kind of stuff. And I do go back in from time to time during the day, maybe throughout the week, just to see what if anybody has any comments or questions that I need to address and share with others. And good morning, John. Good to have you with us this morning as well. Pray things are well for Cindy and for Alan and Barbara. And I know Cindy's doing a lot over there at the hospital, at home. So prayers for them. Prayers on all that. Continuing, we have been and will continue to do so. Speaking of prayers, I will again mention our brother Kurt One, from here at CUMC. He is in the ICU at Meritus Hospital, and the family is pretty stressed. Family is pretty stressed and has to make some decisions about things and try to figure out as the doctors continue to try to figure out what's going on. They have some thoughts. So prayers for them, for peace, for comfort, for healing, and all that. Okay. Announcements. Do we have any announcements? Announcements. See announcements. Well, Noah's Ark, our daycare, our Christian child care program. It's much more than a daycare program because it's all ages, including school age children up to 6th grade, I believe, that we have involved in that program. And as so many places, it's short staffed. So I want to offer thanks for volunteers, for folks from the church that have given so much of their time to be there, to participate, to help keep the ark afloat. But we do have some good news on the horizon, things on the horizon. We've got a new director who's going to be coming on board to captain the ship. Did I throw enough metaphors in there, enough puns on January 1st? And we're really looking forward to having her join the team, the crew, and she is looking forward to it as well. So we've got that. Still need other people in other places, but we have a new hire for school age children and to help as a helper with school age children. We also have a volunteer that's come in from the community to help with that program as well. So those are good things. A little bit of relief for some folks. So that's good. We need more, but we thank God for what we've been getting. So that's enough for announcements. Oh, good morning, Shar. Good to have you join us this morning. That's enough for announcements. Today is Tuesday, so we will be doing this again tomorrow and Thursday, not Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But we'll get through today's 13, tomorrow 14, and Thursday will be 15. We'll do chapter 15. So actually, after tomorrow, we'll be halfway done. Whew, cool. So let's get to reading. Otherwise, we'll never get to halfway done, right? Shut up, BB, and start reading. Chapter 13. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Then the disciples came and asked him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" He answered, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they may not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, 'You will indeed listen, but never understand, and you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they might not look with their eyes, and listen with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for you see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another case 60, and in another 30. Pause. Ooh, that was a long reading. Read the whole thing. Now we'll talk about it a little bit. So Jesus leaves. He was inside a house, and he leaves, and the crowd goes with him. The way it's written here and in Mark makes it sound like the crowd was in the house with him, which is, it kind of lets you know that it's not a literal story. It's a narrative, it's a tale. And perhaps you can read it in a different way that says the crowd just showed up after Jesus left the house. Okay, doesn't matter. And Jesus went and sat in the boat and to teach, to talk. People say, well, why did he do that? Well, okay, you hear different arguments. One is that sitting in the boat. It would have good sound so that everybody could hear him. Being in the boat, he was a little bit apart, so he had some space so that people could see him better and hear him better. And of course, sitting is the proper position of a rabbi. Matthew doesn't really say why, and we're putting all kind of stuff in there. I would say because a boat was nearby. And so he sat down in the boat on the water. So he didn't get wet. Now, we usually, when we hear this parable, it's hard for us. It's hard for us to not focus in on the explanation part, the allegory part, rather than simply looking at the parable part. What's the difference between a parable and an allegory? A parable is more like a metaphor, and you're looking for things. Allegory is a little bit different. It's an extended parable metaphor, perhaps, but each thing has a different representation, means a different thing. So allegories tend to be more symbolic, whereas a metaphor is just a way of expressing something that you really can't express in a different way. And a parable is like that, is a metaphor. And it's a way of describing something. And in particular, it's a way of describing something involving kingdom work and kingdom of heaven in some way, using things that people have a better understanding of to try to help them grasp it better, because you just can't express it any other way. Okay, so that's a parable, a metaphor, versus an allegory. And the allegory part of this story is the explanation, where each thing is described as being something. And this soil represents this soil represents that. And so we read this, and either we've read it a number of times, we've heard it read and preached a bunch of times, or we've seen the movie Godspell, and we know the allegory, and we focus in on the allegory, with the question being, what kind of soil are you? What kind of soil are you? That's all. And what kind of soil am I? We try to see, what kind of soil am I? Am I this fruitful soil that brings forth an abundance, or am I the soil that gets picked at and loses very easily, and all that? So we focus in on that. However, a lot of Bible scholars believe that isn't part of the original story. That part, the allegory part of this section, was a later addition. It wouldn't have been part of Jesus's speech. They say Jesus probably said the parable, the first part of this. But from the disciples asking, why do you speak in parables, through the explanation of the seed, is an addition by the early Christian church, perhaps by Matthew himself, although it's probably in existence outside of Matthew, and he connected it and added it in here. So it's an add-on to what Jesus said, is what Bible scholars say, because the first part is the real parable part, not the explanation part. The explanation part isn't the parable. The first part is the parable. When we concentrate on the allegory, we concentrate on the soil. We concentrate on ourselves. And when we do that, we're missing some other important parts, because the first part, the parable itself, is the parable of the sower. We often call it the parable of the seed, or the sower and the seed. But when you read just the parable part, the sower, even though the sower is only mentioned at the very beginning, is a very important part of the story, and is really the key to the parable. So and we can learn things about the sower. I've used the expression that he was a pretty wasteful farmer, just throwing his seed anywhere, right? Which can describe God's love. But even that isn't the point of the story. The point of the story is how the kingdom of heaven happens. And that the kingdom of heaven, in spite of the bad, problems that can happen is ultimately going to win and be victorious and will ultimately take root. So that's a different take on the parable. But it may be more of what Jesus has in mind, because we'll see a lot of his things here are talking about the kingdom of heaven. And so when we read this one apart from the rest of the stories, we might not think that that's the case, but it's interesting. So the disciples say, why do you talk to them in parables? And Jesus says, for you've been gifted to understand. So what Matthew is saying, Matthew takes Mark's, which is much stronger and almost nastier with regards to the crowds, because that's who the them are, the people on the outside. That's who the disciples are asking about. They're saying they're the people on the outside. However, because Mark is more interested with the messianic secret. It's kind of like secret knowledge. Matthew does not have that idea, that concept in his theology. His doesn't have that. But for Matthew, the understanding is a gift from God, that God blesses the people who understand with understanding. Okay, so that's what he says there. You've been gifted to understand. You've been granted this gift of understanding. They haven't. When we read it that way, then we can say, well, maybe the parables aren't so much to keep it hidden, but they're the way to help them understand, because they don't have the gift of understanding. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense the way I said that. I think it does. And so that's why Jesus speaks in parables, because without the gift of understanding, they can't understand. So he's trying to make it simpler. Whereas the disciples, they don't have this, they don't ask here in Matthew's, they don't ask, what does this mean? Doesn't ask what this means. Jesus goes on and explains it, uses that allegory part, which again might have been an addition by somebody else. Cool. Okay, let's continue. He put before them another parable, the kingdom of heaven. See, we're going into this kingdom of heaven stuff. So we should make that connection that first one has something to do with the kingdom of heaven too. All these parables are about the kingdom of heaven in some way. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in the field, but while everyone was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, an enemy has done this. The slave said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, no. For in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into the barn. Pause. So a lot gets taken in here. And when Jesus says about that the enemy came while everyone was asleep. Now, oftentimes Matthew uses that idea of sleep for sloth, for laziness, especially with regarding righteousness and the kingdom and kingdom work. Here, he just seems to be speaking of actual sleep, literal sleep. So meaning that it happened at night, when no one was watching, when no one could see, is when someone planted the seeds of the weeds. People try to pick out, what kind of weeds is he talking about here? Dandelions? Well, probably not dandelions, because they're more North American. But it would seem to be some sort of a weed that resembles wheat in some way, perhaps, so that you wouldn't notice it, especially as it was small and just growing. but until it got bigger, The point here is the not separating of the wheat and the tares, the wheat and the weeds at first, to allow them to grow, to allow them to live together, Jesus and Matthew's using Jesus's words. It would seem to counter arguments that were taking place at the time as far as trying to have pure groups, purity of gatherings and of communities of faith, and not allowing outsiders in. And Matthew did not like that idea, so he's using this to say, there were certain groups, not only in Christianity but in Judaism. The Pharisees and the Essenes in particular wanted purity within their groups, and Matthew is using Jesus to say, no, let them live together, let them come together. At the end, at the judgment, then everyone will be separated out. But of course, in the meantime, perhaps weeds can become wheat, and wheat can become weeds, He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in the field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Pause. Is a mustard seed small? Yes, mustard seed is very small. Does a mustard seed grow large? It can grow pretty big, usually about 6 feet tall as a shrub. Unusual ones can grow to be maybe 9 feet tall. Does a mustard seed become a tree? Never. Mustard seed does not become a tree. Mustard seed only becomes a shrub. Why then does Matthew, or Jesus for that matter, use the word tree to describe what the seed becomes? Because a tree is a symbol of an empire. The tree is the symbol of an empire, or at the very least, a kingdom. So Jesus and Matthew are using this idea, this symbol, this analogy of the seed becoming, the kingdom of heaven being like a seed, starting small, but becoming literally an empire, And it has that thing about birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Again, that ties in with that imagery of an empire as a tree. You can read in, I think it's Isaiah. It's either Isaiah or Ezekiel. Oh, darn it. We used it a couple months ago in a reading where it was a warning that this tree had grown and was so well and lived right next to the water, and did what? Gave shelter to birds who nested in its branches. And the prophet was speaking of a particular kingdom, an empire, who then collapsed. They no longer lived up to this promise that they had shown. So that's the kind of that's the metaphor, the symbolism there. That's what Jesus and Matthew are saying, that the kingdom of heaven is like this small seed, but it becomes not just a shrub, but an empire kingdom in which all can have safety under its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Pause. Again, whenever Jesus uses a parable, he's using things that people would understand, to try to help them understand something that you can't understand. And basically here, you can say it different ways, but I would say that the simplest explanation for what Jesus is saying right here is, it doesn't take much, right? For yeast, just a small amount of yeast affects everything, affects all of the flour. And a small amount of kingdom life can affect great amounts of other kinds of life, of our life and of each other's life. And you can't stop the work of yeast. Once you put yeast in the dough, and you don't have to do much with it, right? And that's the other part of many of these things, these parables that Jesus is saying. Someone plants the seed, but it doesn't really say that anyone works it or tends it or anything. It grows on its own. Someone puts the yeast in the flour, and then the yeast does its work, and it expands. Jesus told the crowd all these things in parables. Without a parable, he told them nothing. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth to speak in parables. I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world, period. In other words, try to make things understandable, to reveal things that have been hidden. And not that they were purposely hidden by God, it's just that understanding wasn't there for what God had intended. Continuing, verse 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. So he got out of the boat apparently and went inside. And his disciples approached him saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. Pause. So this explanation of the parable, and it's the wheat and the weeds. Jesus gives the explanation. And again, it's probably a later addition, not part of Jesus's initial parable, but an addition by the church, perhaps even an addition by Matthew. Why do I say by Matthew? Because Matthew is so interested and so concerned with the end times and with judgment. So, and that's what comes into play in this explanation of the parable. We've got that judging taking place. So it's all about end times stuff. And it's also very clearly here the conflict between the two kingdoms, kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of the world, or the kingdom of evil, kingdom of good and evil, battling it out, and all evil being removed from the kingdom of heaven. So we've got that kingdom conflict popping up in here once again. Let anyone with ears listen. Listen. Now, yeah, those parables were all considered to be in the Markan style. It's like how they're written in ABA kind of thing. Now, Matthew changes his style a little bit for the next three triad of parables that he has in this next section. So we're going to read this next section, 44 through 52. And we'll read them all and then go back. Okay. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets and threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, yes. And he said to them, therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. Pause. Excuse me one sec. Yeah, I thought so. No, there's one more section. Okay, so we'll talk about the three parables, triad, the three parables. Now, one and two, this is the only place that you see them in the New Testament. And three. and 3. I don't think any of these appear anywhere else in the canonical Gospels. The canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I think 2 of them appear in the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas, which I used to have on my shelf. I'm not sure if I still do or not. I need to go looking for that. It's been a while since I read it. I should read it again. The Gospel of Thomas isn't constructed like, it's not constructed like Matthew. It's not a full narrative going on and on and on. The Gospel of Thomas is more like a collection of sayings of Jesus, and purported to have been written by Thomas, or they not that it says that, but tradition says that about it, and they get that idea because in the Gospel of Thomas, Thomas is made one of the primary disciples. In most of the other in the Gospels in our Bible in canon, Thomas is not quite an afterthought, but almost. He's not part of the inner circle, right, of Peter, Andrew, James, and John. He's one of the outsiders, and Peter is the disciple. Well, in the Gospel of Thomas pretty much takes over that role. But it's a bunch of sayings of Jesus, some of which you find elsewhere in the Gospels, some of which are close to what you find in the Gospels, but have a little bit of a different twist. Of course, we don't know exactly for sure which ones came first, right? Chicken or the egg, almost. So, but it's good to read. It's not part of canon, but it's perfectly fine to read and to contemplate on and to compare and to notice the differences and why there's differences. Anyway, so a couple of these do appear in that. First 2 parables are hard to separate. They're hard to separate because, but we should. They're hard to separate because there are some similarities to them. And Matthew does like to do things in 2s as well as the 3s. So it's almost like he's repeating himself with this, but he's not, because of the differences between the 2. In the first one, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. So in this one, we have a farmer. We have a person doing their job, doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they are surprised at their find. So it's a person who is surprised to find the kingdom of heaven. In other words, the kingdom of heaven can come to you, and can be surprising when it does. The guy is overwhelmed with joy, but he takes this treasure that he finds and he reburies it. He doesn't tell the person who owns the land. How do we know somebody else owns the land? Because then it goes and it says that he went and sells everything so that he could buy the land. He wasn't working his land. He might have been a tenant farmer. He's living there, or at the very least renting that property to grow, to farm, but it wasn't actually his. Or maybe he was just a servant of the person who actually owned the land. Whatever the case, it wasn't his. So we can this raises some interesting, legal, moral issues. Was the guy right to hide it and to not tell anybody about it, to not bring it to the owner of the field, right? But that's not the point. Jesus can use things of questionable legality and questionable morality to make different points, to make some other point. So the point here is the guy wasn't looking for the treasure, but he found the treasure. He was filled with joy at finding the treasure, and he sold everything he had so he could have the treasure. So what's the point of the parable? The point of the parable is you can find the kingdom of God without actually looking for the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, can surprise you. The key part is the giving of, the selling of everything to get it. This is Matthew Matthew's view of discipleship. All in. I got to go all in on this. This is the last hand on Texas Hold'em, pushing all in. All my chips are going in. I am invested in the kingdom of heaven with everything I have. I'm not holding anything back. I want to be part of that. So that's what Matthew is using Jesus's words to say. Perhaps that's what Jesus's intent was in the first place, but definitely that's why Matthew chose this one to put in here, whereas the other gospel writers don't include this story. Second one, again, some similarities but differences. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. And on finding one of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. So what's similar, what's different? Different is this guy was looking for something and he finds it. He finds it. What's he looking for? He's looking for a pearl. Well, a pearl in the culture at the time would have been a symbol of a great thing, a symbol of near perfection, we might say. We think of diamonds that way, or we'll call things, ooh, that's a diamond in the rough, because it's something that's like almost perfect compared to everything around it. That's the idea of a pearl in the first century culture. So this guy, he loves pearls, and he's in search of very fine pearls. He's looking for really good things. He's looking for perfect things, and he finds it. He finds it. And what does he do? He goes and sells everything he has so that he could buy it. All in, pushing in all the chips into the pot on the last round of Texas Hold'em. That's how invested I am in this. I'm not going to hold anything back. Not going to hold anything back. Third parable, Triad. Third parable is kind of the parable of the weeds, the wheat and the weeds, only using fish instead. So it seems to be Matthew repeating himself because he likes that duplicity, or that wouldn't be duplicity. He likes doing things doubled. So he's telling the same story in a slightly different fashion, just using a different metaphor, a different metaphor for it. Instead of wheat and weeds, we've got fish, both good and bad, and it is bringing in that final judgment, kingdom of heaven, and righteousness. And anybody who has been trained in this, any scholars and stuff that have been trained. Oops, excuse me 1 minute, I gotta plug in my battery. Pay no attention to what's behind the curtain. It's like a Wizard of Oz reference, right? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Pay no attention to the man in front of the curtain at this point. Anyway, so Jesus's words are that the scribe is like the master of a household that brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. It's important to be trained for the kingdom, and you need to be using everything you have for the kingdom. You need to use everything you have for the kingdom, whether it's old or new. All right, let's finish up chapter 13, verses 53 to 58. When Jesus had finished these parables, he left that place. He came to his hometown, back in Capernaum, and began to teach the people in their synagogue, so that they were astounded and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these deeds of power? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all of his sisters with us? Where did this man get all this?" And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their own country and in their own house." And he did not do many deeds of power there because of their unbelief. End of the chapter. Now it's interesting because, again, they don't deny what Jesus is saying or doing. It certainly sounds like right from the beginning, where did he get all this wisdom? Well, that sounds good. Where did he get all this power? Well, that sounds great. They're believing in his miracles, and they're amazed at his teachings, as people in other places were, right? Where he speaks with authority. And could this be the son of David? They're asking the same things, but they go in the different direction. They're going in the direction of like the Pharisees and stuff, and they drew offense at him. They took offense at him. Remember, a couple chapters ago, Jesus said about that warning to those who take offense at me. And what did we say that meant, and what was that about? In particular, the people who won't receive him because he doesn't fit their idea of what the Messiah is going to be like. And so I think that's why Matthew uses that same word here. They took offense at him, keeping it connected. So they took offense at him because he didn't fit their image of Messiah, didn't fit who they thought the Messiah should be, even though he's doing all these wonderful, amazing things. And Jesus couldn't do many things now in their hometown because of their unbelief. Well, friends, that's it for today. We finished chapter 13. Woohoo! I do pray that this has been beneficial to you in some way, shape, or form, that God has spoken to you in some way, shape, or form. So through something we've said, something we've read together, that you've learned something or relearned something perhaps that you had forgotten about, that you learned things from a different point of view. That's always awesome. Learn something else about it. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to what our living, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, Papa, and then tell somebody about it, including me. I need to hear those things too. Until tomorrow, be blessed, my friends.